Okay, I see folks are just joining in, so I'm going to go ahead and get ourselves started here. So again, welcome everybody to the latest installment of the Royalty Exchange Investor Office Hours webinar. This is a live question and answer webinar that we hold once a month for both new and veteran investors to basically answer any questions that you have. My name is Anthony Bruno. I'm the Director of Communications here, and I'm the host for the webinar today. And we have got a number of folks from Royalty Exchange here on our panel of experts, so to speak. First off, we have Rob Bernard, who is our Chief Counsel, who will answer quite a lot of the questions if history is any guide. We also have with us today our co-founder, Gary Young, who will be talking a little about NFTs and basically correcting all the answers that I provide if history is also any guide. We also have Dayton O'Connor. He is our head financial analyst, and we have John Gestel, who is basically doing all of our customer relations work with investors and sellers and really anybody who calls in. So this is our panel. Thank you all for joining us today. We are recording the session, and we will send a replay of it to those that are on the call, of course, as well as all other investors who are registered, so they all can get the benefit of your questions and our answers. So a quick bit of housekeeping before we get ourselves started here today. At the bottom of your Zoom screen here, you will see a number of prompts, and one of them is the Q&A button. Please use that to submit your questions. If you submit a question using the Q&A, I have a field that allows me to review the questions and answer them and mark them as cleared and so on and so forth. So that is the main function by which you can leave your questions live during the call. I would ask that you please not use the chat feature. That's a little bit harder to monitor, and I can't promise that we'll notice or get to your questions. So please use the Q&A feature if you could. As always, the way these things get started is we look to the questions that were left in advance as you were registering for the webinar. And so we are going to address those questions first, and then we will move over to any other questions that you might have that you submit live. If you submit a question live during a certain topic that we're getting into at the time, I'll try to get to those as well. It's just a bit of a challenge to kind of navigate both screens. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get ourselves started. So Gary, you ready? You're on deck. The first question out of the gate, we're gonna answer all the NFT questions first. So we're going to spend the first part of this just answering the ones that were left in advance. If you have any questions yourselves, please ask them about NFTs, and we'll go ahead and try to clear up any confusion there might be around those right off the bat. So, Gary, how do NFTs work?
It's a good question, a big question. So basically, fundamentally, the NFTs we're launching are assets that exist everywhere on the Ethereum blockchain. And the difference, really the fundamental difference between what we're doing and what everyone else is doing with NFTs is most NFTs are like digital artwork, right? And there's no income or yield associated with them, and they're collectibles. What we're doing is we're taking that paradigm of non-fungible tokens, which is what NFT stands for, and attaching the right to collect a stream of royalties to those tokens, right? And fundamentally, the biggest for folks on this call that have been Royalty Exchange customers for a long time, the fundamental difference here is that the transaction basically has to be settled in Ethereum, and then you'll receive the royalties if you win this first NFT auction in Ethereum. So, we see it, and we've gotten a lot of questions from artists and songwriters that they would like to get involved with NFTing their music. And so we created this product to meet that demand from their side. And the other thing is, I think it's a really interesting bet because it's basically a two-part bet as an investor, right? So you're looking at the underlying quality of the music royalty stream, and then you're also basically get exposure to Ethereum if you'd like, right? So fundamentally, that's how these NFTs work.
Great. There's a couple other questions here. Who is enforcing NFT ownership?
So I think there's kind of two parts to that. So the first is all of these tokens exist on the Ethereum blockchain. So anyone can see them using something like Etherscan, and so they exist in this Ethereum world computer is the best way to put it. And then from the perspective of taking the royalty stream and paying the token holder, we'll be doing that.
Great, thank you. How will people display artwork? Part of NFTs is actually getting a piece of art, the collectible component of it. Can you explain that portion?
Yeah, so basically any NFT wallet will be able to display that artwork. Things like OpenSea, which is a large NFT exchange, you could display the artwork there. Basically, because this is an Ethereum NFT, any wallet or exchange that handles NFTs, you'll be able to display the artwork there.
All right, thank you. And see here, you kind of addressed this, but one of the questions is, what are the different NFTs in the market? Um,
Yeah.
I think maybe we can answer that in two ways. We maybe talk about it more broadly, right? The Uber market, as it were, and then
Yeah.
maybe talk a little bit about what other different kind of NFTs we might expect in our market.
Yeah. So fundamentally, right, like I was saying earlier, most NFTs are digital artwork. They're collectibles. They're like the digital equivalent of baseball cards, right? And the way that there's scarcity, all right. The thing that's kind of revolutionary about NFTs is the ability to have an asset. So like digital assets, right, for the last 20 years have been really easy to distribute, basically costless to distribute. You could attach a PDF to an email, send it, doesn't matter. Artwork can go anywhere. But there was no way to enforce scarcity, right? There's no way to say that this PDF is the only one of its type, for example. And so NFTs are really interesting because you have provable digital scarcity. So, which is why the first use case was for collectibles, right? And collectibles is a big market, right? And from sort of some of the breakout NFT platforms over the last year, been probably the biggest one has been NBA Top Shot, where you could basically buy memorabilia related to the NBA in these very provably digital scarce assets. So they could be traded as if they're digital, right? But they also can't be copied. So which is interesting. So those are primarily what the landscape of the NFT market looks like until this week. And what we did, which I think is really interesting, is taking that digital scarcity, that provable digital scarcity, and then attaching it to and attaching the right to collect income based on real world intellectual property to it. And so that that is fundamentally different than everything else out there, and which is why we think it's really exciting.
All right, great. On that note, I think a perfect follow-up then is, do you see the NFT side of our platform as something that will become sort of the primary format of selling royalties? Is that going to be the core part of our platform going forward?
I mean, it's hard to say. I think we're doing this. We did this first NFT auction as a test to see if there was demand from investors that they want to be able to buy these things. And so far that seems to be good. And so like anything else, right, as a marketplace, we're balancing supply and demand. So if there are lots of artists that want to make NFTs and there are lots of investors that want to buy them, then we'll do more of them. If there's not, we'll do less. Right. But this is an option and a product that we're offering now.
All right, good thing. And we got one question coming in live as we've been going through these, which is a great question. I think I'm glad you asked. Does using NFTs for royalties complicate tax consequences compared to non-NFT held royalties?
It's a good question that I can talk in somewhat broad outlines, but we cannot.
Rob, would you like to make our general statement up front here?
Everything you're about to hear is not tax advice. We're not qualified to give it, particularly with NFTs. But yeah, we always recommend you check with your personal tax advisor. But yeah, Gary, you have something you want to broadly say?
I mean, really, the one thing that is required is we still need to collect W-9 or W-8 info in order to pay these royalties and be compliant with U.S. tax law. But other than that, I don't feel particularly comfortable talking any more about the taxes of it.
And so I'm going to throw a question in here, which is not on any of the lists, but I know is on some people's minds, and I want to get on the record to send out to other investors that might be watching this on a replay, which is many of the music-related NFTs that we've seen outside of Royalty Exchange so far. Some have taken place with those offering NFTs overseas and whatnot, and a lot of them have been in a more of a fractional ownership share type of situation. So an artist will sell 100 or 1,000 shares as NFTs in part, a percentage of their master recordings, for instance, and things like that. We are not doing that, and maybe we could talk a little bit about why that is, and if at all we may in the future.
So we're not doing it because those are securities, right? And or we feel pretty strongly that those are securities, and so the way Royalty Exchange works generally, right, is there's one buyer, one seller, and it's an asset sale, and the NFT doesn't change that. So that's why we're doing it, and that's the approach we're going to take for now. It may change, and you guys will be the first to know.
That we know. Another question came in real quick related to NFTs. Is it possible to mitigate or hedge the risk / exposure to fluctuations in Ethereum prices with this investment?
You could do it on your own, but yeah, that starts to get pretty close to investment advice, which we are not qualified to give, unfortunately. So
Right.
it's possible, but yeah.
But then just real quick, just maybe just logistically how it works. I'm going to go by memory here, Gary, so tell me if I get any of this wrong. But like in the bidding, for instance, as you see, the bidding on the platform is done in Ether, and we display the current bid in Ether, and then we also display a conversion dollar rate underneath that, and that's updated. I believe it's every 10 seconds.
5 to 10 seconds.
5 to 10 seconds, something like that. And then in terms of so that's kind of how that portion of it works. And then then you have to, obviously there's 2 business days to transfer as the winning bidder, to transfer your funds to our wallet, which is also done in Ethereum, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of the process, how it works in terms of collecting royalties. Royalties are also paid in Ether, and I don't know if there's any more to say about that, if Robert or Gary have anything they want to add there, but I just wanted to kind of point out logistically how all that works.
Yeah, nothing to add there.
Okay, great.
Good summation.
All right, so moving on then. So we're going to move on to some of the other questions. Please, obviously, if you think of any other questions related to NFTs, we'll still be more than happy to answer them. But there are other questions that were left that we are going to shift over to now as well. Gary, thank you for helping us answer all of those. So first up is a question that says, are there agents that assist and advise those interested in buying royalties? There are in the broader market people called brokers. Basically, they help sellers sell royalties or sell their catalogs to interested buyers. That activity, if I'm not mistaken, exists more at what I would call the upper end of the market. We're talking the multi-million-dollar catalogs. The brokers are usually brokering between a lawyer or a manager of a very high-profile artist with several larger institutional funds at that level. As individuals, I don't know if there's anyone like that out there that helps you. We are not brokers. We are a marketplace, but I would argue that our marketplace serves many of the functions of what you might consider to be a broker without having to pay a broker. So that would be my summation of it. If anyone else has anything else to add there, I will move on.
I think we published a ton of free information and research on how to understand and value these assets, and I would encourage you to start there.
Well, I'm going to get to that. Don't worry. There's a couple of questions that you know what? I'll just do that right now. Actually, several questions, we get them all the time, is how's it all work? We're going to assume you mean how does all it work on Royalty Exchange, and not the broader how does the world work type question. But yes, how does it all work? Basically, to try to answer all of that right now in a call that's a Q&A for lots of investors, it would take a little bit of time. What I would suggest to anyone who's curious about how it all works is to go to our blog. It's right top menu of our website, and there's a section called Investor Resources, and in there are a number of guides and articles that you can kind of just read through one after the other, and it explains how royalties work. It explains how the marketplace works. It explains, how the process after you acquire works. It explains how auctions and exchange works. It's all there, one right after the other. So if you go to the blog, you go to the investor resources section, you're going to see plenty of guides that are going to walk you through all of this step by step. If you still have questions, we're more than happy to answer them. More specific questions related to how it all works, you could ask them on this monthly call. You could also email us at investors@royaltyexchange.com. I'd be more than happy to get back to you as well. So that's basically how it all works. But generally how it works is that you as an investor join the platform. You don't need to be accredited. You can review any of the listings on either the auctions or on the exchange. If you see, you have to be verified in order to make a bid. So once you join, there is a short verification process that ensures that you understand the rules of buying royalties, and when you bid, that the bids are actual binding bids and not just whims and whatnot. And that if you win a bid, you are expected to transfer funds within 2 days. And so we verify that you understand and can comply with all of those steps before we release your account to actually place bids and offers. Once you do, you evaluate the different listings that are available. You can make your bids and your offers as you like. And if you eventually acquire one, we basically administer the payments from the distributor to you on your behalf, whether you own one or multiple different assets. We handle all of that process for you. So that is the general, real basic, stripped down, how's it work answer. But again, to get really into the details, I would encourage you to read the resources that we have available on the blog. Next question left in advance. Are there any other perks to owning a catalog besides collecting the royalties? Well, clearly there's bragging rights to say that you own this particular song. I mean, if you're into the song, if you like, the artist or whatever, you've got that. But other than that, no, not that I could think of. You can't work the catalog for the most part, right? Generally, you don't have the rights to just negotiate licensing a song for a movie or an ad, or you can't, you don't have any rights to do anything really with the music. This is a purely passive investment. There are very occasional outliers in that regard, which will be noted in the listing, but for the most part, this is just something that you own and earn alongside the other rights holders, basically. So anyone else think of any other perks besides cool factor and royalties?
Well, I think just in terms of your broader investment portfolio, it offers something that's alternative and different and is treated different from tax purposes. So
right.
Maybe not specifically, but certainly broadly.
Yes, I mean, it is an uncorrelated asset. We believe it to be highly uncorrelated from public markets. So, but that's more investment thesis stuff. I was reading perks as just like other benefits you might get. But yeah, we could always look at that a little bit further. So are there any special legal requirements for international or non-US citizens regarding the purchase and receipt of royalties? Rob, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, so what we'll need, as we mentioned before, is we'll always need a W-9, or in the case of a foreign investor would be a W-8, whether it's an entity or an individual. And then depending on what your home country's tax treaty with the US is, we'll either have to withhold a percentage of the royalties for US taxes and then pay the remainder through to you. Often cases, the treaty says that there's zero withholding, so that's one thing you'll want to check to make sure what the tax treaty says about withholding of royalties. So that's the biggest thing to keep in mind as a foreign investor.
All right, great. Thank you. Another question here is, this is based on some recent news. Recently, there was an investor who is buying, I think, 10% of Universal Music Group. So the question here is, based on the Universal Music transaction, what was the valuation and what's the effect on transactions? I guess royalty transactions. It's a strangely worded question, but I guess I'd say so that I believe that the recent transaction with Universal Music Group valued UMG at around 40 billion. I think is what the valuation was there. How does that affect the valuation of royalties in general? Hard to say. We always say that the value of royalties is what people will pay for them. And that's why we operate a marketplace. So the marketplace ultimately dictates what the value of royalties are. And that might change from day to day or for, during the day itself. It's not that active where you see the kind of valuations that you see like on a stock market or anything like that, but it's very similar. So I don't see any specific effect upwards or downwards on royalties that you would buy on royalty exchange from the Universal Music Group transaction. It is worth noting that there's a big difference between, say, what's the value of Universal Music Group, which is an organization that collects royalties and distributes them to artists, versus the valuation of, say, a Spotify, which is a company entity that pays royalties to the rights holders. So I do think that any valuation of companies like Universal Music Group, which are in the group of collecting royalties, overall does speak to the value of royalties in general. But I don't think that there's a real specific thing like, oh, Universal Music Group sold for 40 billion, so therefore now all royalties are worth X. Like I don't think it's quite that correlated.
Only thing I would add to that is I think it is Vivendi basically spinning out Universal Music Group is a very bullish sign for music, like the value of music, and as the world is sort of waking up to the really interesting economics of music now that streaming is the predominant source, consumption source, is bullish for these assets, because the in essence, right, this is the folks at Vivendi are not dumb, and they're basically going public or being acquired, right, in a time when music royalties are growing, streaming is growing, and the market is very bullish. So I think it's a positive sign, but I don't know that, and I agree with you, Anthony, that it's hard to say on any specific asset what sort of impact that'll have.
Great, thank you. Next question here is, can you explain the difference between music and video or film royalties? What does the accounting look like from royalty exchange? So it's a good question. I think fundamentally, to use Gary's favorite term, they operate very similarly in that you're paid based on use, and I think that's their general likenesses. Differences being, there's different organization, how the rates are set I think are done differently with music. A lot of the publishing side of the royalties that are paid are rates that are set more by government entities and copyright judges and things like that, whereas I think in the film and TV film royalty world, that's more negotiated and whatnot. I'm going to really quickly run out of runway in terms of my knowledge on this film and TV space, so I'm going to stop talking and throw it out to the rest of the panel. But for the most part, they basically act the same in terms of how they generate revenue, but in terms of the back end logistics, does anyone here have anything that they could add to the primary differences there? Robert,
Yeah,
Gary, or
there's a lot less granular data on the film side. A lot of times when you'll see raw data for ASCAP or BMI asset, you'll see lines and lines and lines of data with individual uses and plays and things like that. And if we're talking TV and film residuals, a lot of times it's really kind of just comes in the form of a check. Sometimes you'll get an accounting ledger that shows where it was used in general, but not specific line items. It'll just kind of be a lump sum. So it's harder to get into the granular stream counts and things like that on the film side. But otherwise, I would just say, yeah, it's still all based on use, just kind of under different terms and reporting.
All right, great. Next question here. Do you sell complete masters as well? It's an interestingly phrased question. Do we sell master rights? Yes, you can buy master recording rights through royalty exchange. When you say complete masters, I'm going to interpret that as asking whether we sell the complete copyright, such as the same level of rights that, say, the label owns. And to that, I would say rarely, but we have. It's not a common thing. Generally, what you see is an artist selling whatever share of, a share of their masters that they are currently collecting from the label. But if the label is going to sell a catalog, they would have to be from the owner side, or if it's an independent artist, them selling off their complete copyright as well. But it's not something that happens I can only think of really one time that it happened. I don't know if anyone else has any better memory than I.
Yeah, just a couple, but they're very rare.
Okay. But it can happen. And it's noted, by the way, in the listing, you'll see the first question is copyright included, yes or no. It's almost always no, but that's where you will note whether the copyright is included. Does a purchaser of royalty rights have any say in how the asset is marketed so as to help maximize revenue income? Again, unless you have that copyright that we just mentioned, no. It is a passive investment. You are investing alongside those who have the expertise and the financial incentive to maximize the value of that royalty stream already. So you don't really need to. Some folks that come in from the music industry want to know if they can do that sort of thing. The answer is generally no. You don't have negotiation rights for that kind of stuff. So another question, new to royalty exchange, looking for getting started guidance on syndications, so syndicates. So I'll answer this one. So first of all, again, if you're new to royalty exchange, please go to the blog. There's a lot of information there about how the platforms and different aspects of the marketplace works. This one is specific to our private syndicates. For those of you that may not be familiar, private syndicates are, speaking of rare occurrences, something that we do very rarely, where we have a larger catalog that we then split up into a finite number of shares that we can sell, or they're basically units in a LLC essentially that holds the royalties. You have to be an accredited investor to participate in those based on SEC regulations. There's a lot of paperwork and different types of transactions, or I'm sorry, different types of rules and regulations involved with that. We've done, I think, 3 since we started, so it's not like something that happens all the time. So there's really no getting started guidance on that. If we have another private syndicate in the future, we will make it known to all investors with all the details related to that specific syndicate, because they can kind of change from one to one. And so that more information will be provided then, but there's really not a whole lot of information I can provide to you about syndications, or syndicates rather, right now. Here's a question: how accurate are the earnings? I would say they're pretty accurate. Rob, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, any data that you see on royalty exchange is obtained directly from whoever distributes the royalties. So it's not exactly like we're taking the seller's word for it on how much money they made when they come to us. One of the first things we do is get the statements directly from their distributor to make sure that what we're presenting is what was actually received and is correct.
Perfect. The second part of that question was, why are there sometimes multiple listings for the same song and right type? Well, great question. What many people may not know is that for every song that you hear, there are likely multiple songwriters attached or involved in that song. So what often happens with us is one songwriter will come to us, sell their share of that song or that collection of songs, be very pleased with the result that they received from that, tell their fellow songwriters, and then they come to us and do a similar transaction, do a similar deal. So mainly when you're seeing the same song up multiple times for the same types of rights multiple times, it's because there's a different seller behind it who owns a different slice of that same song. And that's the simple answer for that. How are royalties distributed? Excellent question. Again, I'm going to point you to the blog, which has there's one that's titled, I believe it's called "Who Collects What for Who," right? And that's basically, or whom, I think I've been corrected at one point. So that is how that's a great one to read. But generally, just to kind of answer the question while we're talking on the call, it kind of depends on the type of royalty you're talking about. But in the music business, there are various different types of institutions that have been around for decades who are charged solely with collecting and distributing the royalties for that specific type of royalty. So for instance, with public performance royalties, you have organizations called performing rights organizations, or PROs. They are charged with collecting public performance royalties and distributing them to the publishers and the songwriters that are their members. There's also a group of people called publishers. Publishers collect mechanical royalties, public performance royalties for publishers, and licensing sync royalties. That's what they do. They exploit the catalog in a good way, collect the royalties that are due, and pay their songwriters as a result, as well as themselves. On the master recording side, there are usually labels. If an artist is signed with the label is the one who collects the royalties due for sales and streaming and whatnot, and pays the artist based on their contract. You have some independent artists who do so more directly. They use digital distributors. Same idea. The distributor will put their content on the various different types of services. and then we'll pay the artist based on the usage of their music from those services. So it's kind of, like I said, the short answer is it depends on the royalty stream, but there are the whole music. What you basically are asking is, how does the music business work? Okay, because that's basically what the music business is created to do, is to collect and distribute royalties. And we work with those organizations for every asset that we put onto the platform to ensure that they are in fact collecting the royalties and are in fact going to pay the investor the royalties that are due once they acquire the asset. So that's the shorter answer there. How are you seeing and doing investments on the new artists? So I think this question is basically, it's a strangely worded question, but basically, what are we doing with artists outside of the US? And real quickly, we are diversifying internationally at a rapid pace. We've had a number of assets that were, catalogs from the Brazilian market that we went through a couple of weeks ago. Right now, for instance, there is one from South Africa. We've done several with artists in Sweden, the UK, Germany, Italy. There's no boundary to what we offer, so long as the distributing organization will work with us to send the royalty payments to the investor after the sale. We'll work with them. It's that simple. Okay, so here's a good question. How do I go about getting a price for a random artist that comes to mind? So someone, let's say they want to get a price for an artist that they like, they want to buy from. That's not how it works. With us is that we are only able to offer financial information and history and whatnot on the assets that are actually placed onto the marketplace. And so that requires the artist to actually come to us to do so. A lot of investors say, hey, I want to buy this particular artist song. That's going to be a little more difficult unless that artist happens to be using our platform. We'd hope to get to a point where all artists have portions of their songs in our marketplace, but that's not currently the case. So there's really no way to request royalties from this specific song or this specific artist. This is a great question. Dayton, you're up. Hope you're still there. How do you analyze royalty investments? Well, I'll ask Dayton, who is our royalty investment analyzer.
Thanks, Andy. So when we're preparing these listings for auction, we try to take a holistic view of the asset. We have available to us the historic earnings, at least 3 years worth of distributions from a given source. And in that, we're assessing at a high level, top line figures, the trend in earnings historically and the dollar age of the catalog. It's been our view that catalogs that command a higher dollar age generally translate to a higher value royalty asset, given the fact that a catalog that has been earning for a longer period of time is more likely to continue earning for a longer time frame. We're also taking a look as well to see what earnings are being driven by source. So say a catalog that has a higher dollar age that is primarily driven by streaming, we would expect that to have a longer tail of distribution value than say a younger catalog that is driven by radio play. Maybe it's a couple of new singles that came out recently that we'd expect to have a fatter tail of distributions. That's at a high level. I hope that addresses that question.
Great. Yes, I think it does. And again, not to sound like a broken record, but there is a whole section on the blog that says how to value royalties, where we kind of break down dollar age and some of the other factors that we look at when we're doing our analysis of incoming catalogs. Take a quick second to switch over to some of the questions that came in live, since you guys are asking them now. And I want to get Gary to answer at least one of these before he has to jump. So the first one is, would you consider creating a broker membership to increase liquidity? I don't believe so, but I don't know, Gary, I'm not sure what that would even entail.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd love to explore that more with you. But I don't, perhaps. I think it would really depend on what that looked like specifically.
Yeah.
So if you, my email address is Gary@royaltyexchange.com. If you want to email me about it, we could have a conversation. Be happy to.
There you go. But follow up, different investor asking them, but how liquid are these assets? And they're relatively liquid. So the exchange portion of the marketplace has a secondary market feature, so that if you were to acquire an asset on a royalty exchange, you can then relist it on the exchange with a price at which you'd like to sell it for, and other investors can make you offers. And that is our liquidity path. How liquid, honestly, depends on how high you set that price. But generally, that's how it works.
Yeah.
This is another question maybe for you, Gary. Can you help with the acquisition of full masters and more rights? I'm interpreting that as being like if I were to buy a passive master recording stake, but I wanted to get the full stake so I can exploit the catalog like a label, for instance. If someone were to buy it, would we in some way help them buy the full stake?
Generally, no.
Right.
No.
Good question. That's what I thought. So this is actually a great question that's here. The CRB, which for those who are not aware, is short for the Copyright Royalty Board. The Copyright Royalty Board is the panel of judges who's charged with setting royalty rates for mechanical and webcasting and other types of basically digital royalty activity. So the question here is that the CRB are due to announce their updated royalty rates for the time frame of 2021 to 2025. Would this outcome have a direct impact on the future payouts of owning royalties? Yes. So this organization sets the royalty rates that are being paid. If you own through royalty exchange those particular types of royalty rates, then the amount that you will be paid for those rights will be dictated by the rates that this court sets. Generally, those do increase, okay, over time. The standard mechanical rate for like CDs and whatnot's remained rather static over the years. The music industry is less concerned about trying to raise the 9.1 cents per CD or record sold mechanical right. They're less concerned with fighting that fight and letting that stay as it is, because that's not how most music is transacted these days. They are focusing their arguments on streaming and webcasting and whatnot. So, but primarily streaming. So yes, when streaming mechanical royalties rates go up and you own mechanical royalties for a catalog, you will be paid more per play for owning those rights. And the follow up on that, would we put a buyer in touch with the people responsible for negotiating royalties? No, I don't believe we would. That's what they do. And is there what incentive to maximize royalties would such an agent have? What incentive to maximize royalties would an agent have if the royalty stream had been sold to a passive investor? Okay, so again, this goes back to the fact that there are multiple shares of a royalty that different. So there's one song, but like 20 different people can own a different part of that royalty stream, right? So if one of those people sold all, or even just half, or even just 25% of their royalty stream to a passive investor, the other 19, as well as the one who sold that still retains some, all still have an incentive to increase the royalties that they earn and own themselves. Okay, so it's important to remember that for every royalty stream you see on royalty exchange, it is not the entire royalty stream. Okay, it is a slice, and in some cases, it's a slice of all the royalties that catalog or that song generates. And all the other people along the chain who retained their slices are still financially incentivized to maximize the rate of royalties that they collect. Okay, so that's why even though one passive investor might be new to that chain is still very long and very strong. Okay, that's the best way I can answer that question. Moving it back to the questions left in advance then. How many accounts can we have? Rob, we talked about this before the call. You had a quick and easy answer for that.
Yeah, you really only need one account to be verified to bid. Sometimes we'll have folks that bid on behalf of themselves as an individual and also as an entity. It's really all kind of governed by which email address you use. So unless you tell us you want to have separate accounts, we'll merge them all into one just so that you handle it, but it's really all based on your email. So.
Okay. Next question is, how often are royalties updated with new choices? And where do the earnings go for an investor? Is there like a specific account? Let's answer the second part first. Rob, how do we pay the investor?
Yeah, so the way we handle it is everything's done by a direct deposit unless you prefer otherwise, but we have a payment system that you'll sign up once, we'll get you set up with direct deposit, and then if you buy multiple royalty streams, as those come in, we have 30 days to turn those around to you, and we'll just pay those all via ACH.
Okay. And in terms of how often are royalties updated with new choices, I'm not really sure what that means, but I think it means how often can you opt to buy more royalties. That's just, the marketplace, like the website. We are constantly putting up new listings. We have a weekly marketplace update that just went out this morning, as a matter of fact, that will tell you, hey, here's what's new this week. You can sign up for alerts for anything that's new added to the platform. So just, sign up for the notifications and we'll let you know when there's new options on the marketplace. Next question, Rob, you're still going to be up. How will this affect 1099s?
So yeah, you'll get a 1099 each year from Royalty Exchange for all the royalties that we collect on your behalf. It's considered ordinary income, so it'll come over on a 1099 list labeled as royalties.
Okay. Next question. If I buy, this says stock in a particular song, but okay, if you buy the royalties of a particular song, composition, and or artist, can I then legally, I believe sample the music that I've invested in? Nope. I don't think so. Rob?
That's correct. Yeah, no, it's the same answer as being able to go out and license. You don't own any piece of the copyright, and in order to do a sample, you have to either own a piece of the copyright or get a license to do that.
Right. Is there a limit to what I can purchase? Just your bank account, as far as I know. Next question. What are third-party sources to research sound investing strategies? That's a good question. I had you up until research, and then when you said sound investing strategies, I lost my answer for you. So if you want to research more about the music business and how music royalties work, there are a lot of third-party sources that talk about music business statistics, news, and whatnot. I share most of these in the marketplace update. We put them on our blog. It's something that we are big fans of following in terms of music industry research. Some of the major entities would be the IFPI, that's the International Trade Association for Record Labels, so that's sound recordings. There's the more domestically in the US, there's the RIAA, and they share a lot of information again about sound recording royalties. There's less resources available for publishing, but you have the what's called the NMPA, or the National Music Publishers Association. That's here in the US. That releases a lot of information about trends and whatnot. There are a number of sort of analysis groups that you could take a look at, like Chartmetric and others that I think might be helpful for you. I actually, what I would suggest is we compiled a lot of these sources of information in the more updated version of the Ultimate Guide to Buy Music Royalties. That is an ebook that's available on our website. So I hate to keep pointing to the blog, but if you go to the blog, you'll see a little prompt to the right in the right column that talks about the Ultimate Guide. It's free. Many of you already have it. Just download it, and there's a lot of different chapters about how everything works and whatnot. But in there is also a future, where else to find information for due diligence, and there's a number of sources that we listed there. What are some of the exciting innovations coming to the platform? Sound like a reporter question. So as the PR guy, I'll say, we have a number of exciting innovations, but nothing to announce at this time. The most recent exciting innovation, you just saw the results of this week, which is the NFT. That is the thing that we've been working the hardest at most recently, and we are happy to have available, but I don't have anything else to talk about past that at the moment. What have been the key partnerships and relationships that have enabled you to maintain the royalty asset piece of your portfolio? I believe that means, how are we getting new assets added to the site all the time? I don't know, Gary, you want to grab that one? Like, how do we?
We have a team of folks that is in the artist and songwriting community. We get a lot of referrals and repeat business from asset owners. And folks come to our site via Google to monetize their royalties.
Don't forget that wonderful blog that's written that just draws in all kinds of people.
Yeah, it does.
So, what kind of service will institutional investors get from you? Actually, Gary, you want to grab that one as well? Do we do anything different or special for institutional investors in our platform?
I mean, at this time, not really. Nothing formal, but would definitely be interested in having a conversation with any institutional investors on this call about what kind of product we could build to make this more accessible.
I think one thing I'd just add, just to broaden the potential viewpoint there, is we do have, and this is not solely for institutional investors, this is for any investor, but where there is a feature called a standing order. So that if you're an institutional investor and you have a certain size of capital that you want to deploy, but you don't want to have to go and constantly look at the site and make individual bids and make individual offers in order to fill that order, so to speak, what you can do is you can leave a standing order where you could just basically say, okay, I have $2 million that I want to spend. I want to buy them in catalogs in increments of minimum X, and they need to have these features, right? And there'll be something to dollar age, etc. You can leave an order on the site, right? And it just stays there. And as catalogs come into our system and go through our analysis process, we'll automatically match them to standing orders first. And if the seller sees that offer and wants it, they can just click accept, and the whole thing takes place automatically. And then you'll just own these catalogs as they fill your order. That would be one thing that I think when we initially created it, we thought would be of particular interest to institutional investors. So that's why I bring it up. If you want more information on that, you could always just email us, and we can kind of point in the right direction. But it's pretty much available right in the interface. So there's two questions here related to the same thing. Left in advance, it says, what portion of the royalties will I be receiving? On the live Q&A, there was a question that asked, is the entire royalty of ownership of a given stream disclosed by Royalty Exchange? In other words, how is an investor to know what % of the total royalty stream he or she is purchasing? At the moment, we don't provide what % of the royalty stream you're purchasing, and that's for a number of reasons. One is that there's for catalogs that have multiple different kinds of songs in it, it's not too much of an issue. But when there's an individual song, it is, and then people can kind of start to do the backwards math on how much a song actually makes from year to year, and there's some privacy of ownership concerns around that we want to respect. But on the other hand, honestly, from an investor perspective, what you're seeing on the listing is how much the % that sold has earned. So you're seeing all the details of the asset based on the amount that particular portion of the asset actually makes, which is really the important information. What percentage of the overall share that is kind of doesn't matter. And then third, the fact that when you're looking at some of our songs, this is a songwriter who may have contributed to a number of different songs across a number of different artists, and the share that songwriter owns in each of those different songs and each of those different artists might be different. So to sort of backfill each and every single one of these songs, which % of this royalty stream the artist owns, would take an inordinate amount of time to do, would delay the presentation of more assets on the marketplace, again, for something that ultimately really doesn't matter. So that's how I'd answer that question. Gary, if you wanted to add anything to that.
I think that was a good answer.
Okay, and the pushback I'm getting is that it matters a lot, because if the percentage is large, the incentive for the agent to maximize income goes down. So in other words, the higher percentage of the share of the song that the investor on Royalty Exchange buys, the lower the person who still owns a percentage that's smaller has to maximize the value of the catalog.
Completely valid point. What I would say to that is, generally the assets that we work with are from songwriters, right? And songwriters, the way it works is, songwriter like signs to a music publisher, and their rights are assigned to that publisher to work. And so most of the assets we sell are passive already. So like, if a songwriter were to sell, let's say a songwriter, and this is exceedingly rare and getting rarer by the day, but like, let's say a songwriter owned 100% of the songwriter interest in a song, right? They still don't really have any control over the exploitation of it. So if you're selling 100% of a passive interest or 50% of passive interest, it doesn't matter in that sense, right? Because the portion of the income that goes to the person that controls it is generally not for sale on our site. That's like 60, the major publishers have about like 62 to 65% market share. And, we're not helping, Sony Music Publishing monetize their royalties. Most of the time it's an individual songwriter that we're working with that already has a passive interest. So I think your point is totally valid. But I thought that bit of additional information would be useful context for you.
Yeah, and I think there's also, go ahead.
Yeah, one more piece is to take your 100% of the songwriter's share, a little further. Is yes, the songwriter is selling 100% of their share, then the publisher still owns 100% of their share. So it's generally like a 50-50 split between publisher and songwriter. So if a songwriter even sells everything that they own, there still is another 50% that the publisher owns as well. And they're the ones, like Gary said, has the right to actually go out and monetize it.
Right. And then
one more thing. Sorry.
Okay. You're going to say the same thing I am, I bet. So you go ahead.
Okay. Then on any individual song, right, there's a record label and an artist that are also interested, like have an interest in exploiting it. So like, even if that songwriter in this hypothetical scenario sold 100% of their interest, there's still a music publisher that wants to work it and make more money from it. There's still a record label that wants to push the recording of that song to monetize it. And there's still an artist who is the artist that performs the song that wants to push it and monetize it. So
and I was going to add that even if the one songwriter we worked with sold 100% of his or her share, there's often at least 2 to 3 to 5 other songwriters that also own 100% of their respective shares. So as again, this all goes back to that split of a split of a split of a split of a split question. That I think it's important to remember that that's the case. Now, I think the person who's asking the question is probably kind of wondering, okay, yeah, that's great, but like, how do I know what split of a split of a split of a split I'm getting at here? And again, that kind of just goes back to the accounting morass that would be involved in trying to present all that information for one song. Sure, for a catalog of songs where that split of a split is going to differ for each song in a catalog of 100 songs, that's it's we maybe we can do that, but then we'd sell maybe 4 royalties a year. So that wouldn't exactly work. Okay. I'm sorry, there's what types of rights are traded through royalty exchange? And I think we kind of broke that down. There's basically all types of rights. All types of rights in the music business is available to trade on royalty exchange. And even outside of the music business, we do film and TV. We've done some trademark royalties. We're doing some YouTube earnings right now, etc. Okay. Last question that was in advance was, what would be the minimum investment amount required? And are there royalties which are perpetual, i.e. not restricted by time? So 2 different questions. One, what is the minimum investment amount required? That's a hard question to answer because it just really depends on on the asset that's made available. We've seen assets as low as a couple $1,000s to as high as $1 million. So they're across the board. I will say that the lower the list price or the bid price of the asset that's on the exchange is, the higher the competition, because there's a greater number of investors that can participate at that price level. So those become very big competitive very quickly. But I would say that you should have, and this is not investment advice, but like generally just looking at what we see on here, you should be ready to spend at least $5,000. That's well diversified from your other holdings. It should not be your whole. This is my whole investment, budget, right? This would be a small portion of that, ready to deploy here. So that would be the answer to that question. A few more questions that came in live I want to get to. One is, can someone invest in Royalty Exchange itself as a company? Right now, no, but there's always that question is always kind of like a yes, depending, right? So Gary, you want to?
I mean, we're not right now. Yeah.
Okay. And this is the last question that I'll get into on this thread. This is going back to the percentage of royalty streams sold and whatnot. Same attendee asking to clarify. So are all royalty streams sold on the exchange always from songwriters only? No, it's not always from songwriters only. There's no always, right, necessarily on the platform. It's primarily from songwriters only. And the questions that you're asking related to what percentage of the song is owned refers most directly to the instances where it is a songwriter that is making the catalog available. So that's how I would answer that question. There are artists that may sell portions of their royalties, but for the most, but like when I say artists, I mean recording artists who are selling portions of their recording income. But for those that do so on the exchange or on the auction house, as in terms of a more traditional sale, that is taking place usually with the participation of a label who is charged with collecting and distributing those royalties. In the instance of an artist who owns all of their own royalties as a independent artist, and are using digital distributors, those types of investments take the form of what's called a fixed return asset, where it's not a sale permanently, it's more of a they are going to sell their royalty stream to you until you collect a return of X, which we will note in the listing, and you will collect up until that amount, at which point the royalties revert back to the artist. And in most cases, that's not just for their back catalog, but it's for any new music that they release as well. So the incentive there, to your question, for a recording artist who is independent and using a digital distributor, by having a fixed return amount that once reached reverts back to the artist is still incentivized to pay the full amount that is listed in the listing, and also regain their royalty stream after it's been paid off. So that's their incentive in those situations. So in all cases, we do have checks and balances, as it were, to ensure that there is still people with skin in the game to maximize those royalties. I'll even point to one more thing, just because we're talking about it. We have one such auction right now for YouTube earnings for a YouTube influencer, right? And this is a fixed return, right? You're going to collect up to a certain amount, after which the royalties go back to the artist. But not only are we doing that, but the amount that is paid to the investor is actually capped such that the owner, the seller of the royalty, is still earning from month to month, incentivizing him to continue earning royalties. So we are always in place. We are always trying to ensure that there is an incentive for that others' ownership stakes in the royalty stream are going to continue doing what they need to do to ensure that the royalty stream continues to earn royalties. I've been talking a lot here. Gary, does that make sense? Did I outline that properly?
Yeah. Yep.
See, now he's just making fun of me by giving one word answers. So
No,
those
no,
are all
no.
the.
No,
I know.
no,
I'm joking.
I
I'm
think
joking.
no, but well, no. I just think these assets have many owners usually, and if they don't, there's some not that common, but cases where there's one person, right, that has control over this income stream. And in those cases, the only thing I would add to what Anthony said was, we don't let them sell everything on our site. So like, if someone came to us and through our diligence process was like, hey, I want to I own, control all of this, and I want to sell everything, we say no, right? Because like we have to serve you as an investor, and we have to serve the songwriters and artists, and there's a balance there, and like we do our best to ensure that the incentives are right, and by limiting the amount that a person that controls the asset can sell is one way to do that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you all for participating on the call. Thank you all who are listening to this as a replay afterwards, for watching through through the whole hour. I appreciate it. Again, if there's any other questions that anyone has, we're always happy to answer them. Best is to send them to investors@royaltyexchange.com, and one of us will get back to you with the answer that you need. Until next month's office hours Q&A, I bid you farewell and thank you very much. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.